the honeymoon period is not yet over for President Bongbong Marcos, as evidenced by his very high approval and trust ratings.
Historically, yung surveys say all the first years of each administration daw, except yata nung kay Gloria, mataas. Yeah, so parang in a way, most EDSA Filipinos have given presidents a sort of a honeymoon period for a year.
Sa akin, it's about the people also. People who continue to pinho. The Filipinos are very generous and very kind people. And I think it's about that. First year, pagbigyan natin.
After almost 1 year of the Marcos Jr. Incumbency, I think he has not scored any runs, but has also avoided errors. So it's an ambivalent administration at the moment.
After taking a beating in the May 2022 elections, the opposition vows to come back stronger in the 2025 midterm polls. But it could still be an uphill battle, with the administration still very popular and still with the majority support of Filipino voters. And there are studies and surveys that seem to show that the way is not going for the opposition. We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this edition of The Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. With us tonight in the studio, Robbie Alampay of One News. Welcome back. Ana Marie Paminton, Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star. And of course, Lucy Cusvaldez, the head of News 5. Chiefs, good evening.
Good evening.
Anong malaki story natin ngayon?
Kumustahin ko siya. He came from Chiang Mai.
No, I came from Chiang Mai. There was a regional forum on disinformation. It's actually interesting because, obviously we've been talking about disinformation dito. But the reason it was held there is because now it's a concern for Burmese, it's a concern for Thailand, for Indonesia, and practically the same context also. Elections are coming, they're seeing that every time may election, tumataas ang disinformation. So this is really a regional problem.
And how is the region responding? Halimbawa, let's start with Thailand.
Well, one of the things that they wanted to do, this learning forum that was conducted by International Media Support, of which I'm an advisor there, is one of the things that they really want to do is to just share learnings. So they were really very eager. We had Jonathan Corpus Ong, whom we've had on this show. He was the keynote presenter there. And he presented the lessons here from the Philippines. And then everybody was asking each other, ano yung best practice? Diba? How do we respond?
Ano yun? Media literacy ba yun?
No, it's not about media literacy. This was really gathering media organizations, but also, crucially, dinala yung conversation beyond media. Hindi one of the key lessons there. We even had an influencer there. McCoy Dubs was there with us. And one of the key takeaways there was, it cannot just be media talking to itself. About we have to bring in civil society, we have to bring in parents, education system, librarians, parents associations, and the influencers also, that we need to find a way to reach out to them because they do a much better job at really, reaching out to the audiences that are vulnerable.
Actually, as well, just to put things into context, this episode is not exactly about the opposition per se. It's more about
social media and the pressures brought to bear on the reaction of the public.
And how the public
in view of what they pick up from social media.
How the public views their role in the entire thing, and how it views as well criticism.
Criticism of the government.
Of the government.
Some interesting insights there, no? Parang, actually, ibang ganun, tanong mo na matagal eh. Parang, how do people feel, one, about criticizing government, but also about other people criticizing government? Interesting yung mga sagot dito.
And you don't know whether the public will is actually what's being expressed on social media. And, you're just going to have to respect that, diba? Instead of change it. Who are you to actually say they're wrong, right? I mean, ang hirap din ng balancing act dyan to judge.
Well, tama yan ang topic natin ngayong gabi.
Daming pwedeng himayin ngayong gabi, so we start our conversation with our first guest tonight, right after this break. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Chiefs, and joining the first discussion for the night is University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication Professor Rosel San Pascual. Good evening, Prof, and welcome
Good evening.
to
Thank
the
you.
Chiefs.
Thank you for
Magandang
your
gabi po.
invitation. Magandang gabi po.
Okay, just to put...
Magandang gabi.
Kami College of Mass Communications, kaming dalawa. Ikaw department. Ikaw institute.
Institute? Sobrang ka-institute na kami.
Evolution ba to ng CMC? From IMC?
And that's it for the Chiefs.
So reunion pala ito.
Oo nga.
Okay.
Anyway, so first, let's put your study in context. Okay, we're going to talk about the study that was conducted in 2021.
2021.
So this was before the elections in 2022. And here you were saying that there seems to be a lower tolerance of the public toward criticisms aimed at authority
Yes.
or government.
Yes.
In other words, ayaw ng public na kinikriticize. Strongly disagree sila ron, or
Yes.
disagree.
Yes.
Sabihin na lang natin. So my question to you is, what were the measures or predictors of that low tolerance for criticism against authority? Paano mo nalaman yan?
Kasi noong una, alam naman natin, di ba, social media pala, na may gano'n na talagang phenomenon, na medyo parang allergic ang public pagdating sa criticizing the government, no? So, this is actually the first study na talagang chinek, mineasure, di ba, scientifically, kung ano yung extent, no, nung disapproval towards criticism against the government, no? So, when we measured ditong determinants nga ng criticism, no, syempre, inuna namin dyan, no, social media ba? Nandyan ba yung exposure natin sa social media? Andyan din ba yung public opinion, no, na predominantly in favor of the former president,
Right.
diba? Plus, nakaka-apekto rin ba yung strong approval ratings, for example, kay President, plus yung pakikipag-usap sa iba't iba nilang kamag-anak, kaibigan, online, offline, na mukhang na-reinforce yung ganong klaseng pananaw. So, yung mga ganitong klaseng iba't ibang posibilidad, no, na predictors towards yun nga, dislike of criticism against the government, tinina namin, finactor in namin siya.
Sige, so ano yung number one result? Yung talagang, obviously, ito yun. Ito yung conclusion. Conclusion number one.
Oo. Unang-una na syempre dyan, nandiyan na yung strong approval kay President Duterte, no? Consistent siya across our models, no, na kapag talaga mataas ang approval kay President Duterte, talagang bumababa, no? Talagang bumababa yung ano mo, yung willingness mo to criticize and to tolerate others critical of
So,
the
ano yung
president.
bandwagon effect ba yun?
Ang bandwagon effect kasi pag meron kang perception of majority at uma-align ka do sa kung ano yung opinion ng perception ng majority, no? Pero kasi dito sa nangyayari sa atin, based sa public opinion surveys, hindi lang siya perception eh. Mukhang actual na yun talaga yung mataas yung approval rating eh. So kumbaga, hindi mo lang naririnig sa mga katabi mo, most probably, talagang sinusupport din ng public opinion survey na may magandang approval rating.
So you
si President.
believe the criticism, in other words, you believe that the criticism is not right.
Oo, apparently, no, ang mga Pinoy, no, meron silang discomfort towards criticizing the government.
So you're talking about the government or specifically Duterte? Kasi he's such a popular person. And in fact, Vice President Leni Robredo told us before na mga surveys daw and their own studies show na kapag siya mismo was criticizing President Duterte, bumabagsak actually yung rating niya. Even if valid yung criticism niya. Kaya nalilito sila. So, specific ba to Duterte or to the government?
Oo. Yung questions kasi namin, mix of government and president. Pero syempre, ang reference point nila noon, dahil si former president pa nakaupo, si President Duterte. So, it was a mix. At lahat naman yung nagpo-point out towards yun na may disapproval ng criticism against, again, the government.
Baka ayaw lang talaga ng negative criticism? Ganun ba yun?
Mukha, no?
So talagang
Or
negative, ayaw ng
pro-Duterte
negative.
sila. I think that was my question, no? Was it because they were pro-Duterte and hence they were intolerant of criticisms?
Based din sa surveys namin, sa univariate analysis namin, marami sa kanila voted for Duterte nung election, no? So,
Kasi landslide naman kasi yun.
But I wanted to get to something that you said early on, na sinabi mo nga matagal na that there's this phenomenon na allergic ang mga tao to criticizing I wanted to test that. Is that a hypothesis or was that a given as far as you were concerned? Or kasi alam ko yung allergic ang public officials. Di ba? Alam ko allergic sila sa criticism.
And alam ko rin na adversarial ang media.
Alam ko rin,
diba?
alam ko rin na enjoy yung mga Pilipinong manlait.
Oo,
diba?
rin.
So ibig sabihin, I wanted to check that statement. Was that a hypothesis that this validated from the start? Or is that something that you just found out because of this?
May mga studies actually nagpo-point out na meron talaga tayong tendency, no, na kung sino yung nakaupo, yun talaga yung susundin natin. Tapos medyo hindi talaga tayo magki-criticize sa kanila. Pero to what extent nga yun na magnify or na amplify, mas felt yun during the time of President Duterte because nga of social media. Mas madami na kasi tayong nagpa-participate sa discourse, no? Or mas naging open na yung channels for public opinion, no? So mas naramdaman natin yun, no? So bukod dun sa mga studies na nagsasabi that the tendency is there, no? With our study, dun natin nakita na the correlation actually exists. Pero syempre, the context of that, nung study namin, is sa panahon nga ni President Duterte, na yung correlation between approval of him and yun nga, yung may pagka-dislike.
Does it also apply to pagkatapos na? Ito, we're talking about Duterte in the middle of his term or a president in the middle of his term. But do Filipinos feel like pagkatapos na yan, pwede nang i-criticize yan? I ask also in the context of course, in the last campaign, ang binabatikos was a former president, former President Marcos. Diba? The plunder, the human rights concerns, and so on. Or pagka ba umabot ka sa stature na yun, ano ka na? Diyos ka na.
May immunity ka na, kumbaga, di ba? Actually kasi, ito yung magandang idugtong dun sa study namin. Of course, no, kinapture namin yung tail end ng termino ni President Duterte. Now, what's going to happen, for example, now, na iba na yung nakaupo, magkakaroon pa rin ba, for example, matcha-translate ba yung ganong klase ng aversion towards criticism sa current sitting president? Or, magkakaroon pa rin ba ng immunity pa rin si former President Duterte, no? So, magandang idugtong yan, no? Of course, ang data namin is hanggang ano lang talaga, hanggang dun sa period lang ng end ng term ni Duterte. Pero kasi nag-end ang termino niya on a high note, mataas pa din. And if titingnan natin statistically na yung correlation nga na yun, no, at kahit across all models, talagang pag pinasok mo yung determinant or factor na support for Duterte, talagang nagkakaroon ng mas mataas na level of aversion or disapproval towards criticisms. So, maidudugtong natin doon na baka hanggang ngayon pa din, ganun pa rin yung nangyayari.
Pero Prof, is there any data, whether it's your study or somebody else's, that would show whether this is unique to the Duterte administration or whether it cuts across all the other previous administrations as well? Or baka naman ganun nga lahat, pero mas grabe lang yung support or intolerance to criticism for that administration?
Noong panahon kasi again, operating on the context of public support, talagang nasustain niya yun. Diba? So throughout his term, present yung support na yun. At kung yung present na yun ay strongest determinant nga ng aversion towards criticism, talagang maasahan natin na hindi talaga, di ba? Bababa talaga yung willingness of others nga to talk negatively against Duterte.
And unique yun.
Oo.
President Duterte.
Although, syempre, in terms of, again, statistically testing, wala naman kaming prior data. But based dun sa existing literature, it appears kasi na ang mga Pilipino kasi, we tend to be, parang supportive of whoever is elected, no? But then again, wala kami statistical test for the previous presidents.
Itatayin ko rin dito, isang tanong dito, di ba? Do you agree or disagree na the president was elected because it is the will of God? I mean, how much does that play into, di ba? I mean, that's a notch above saying Vox Populi, Vox Dei.
Tsaka fatalist.
No, di ba? Iba na yun, di ba? But does that tie into that na part ng kung bakit hindi ko kayang batikusin yan? Dahil naniniwala rin ako na yan ang gusto
divinely
ng
will.
paso.
Oo, ang lakas kasi parang, although nung
This
pinasok
is 46%, by the way, 46.8% agree with that statement.
Oo. At saka actually, pag tininan niyo pa ibang measures namin on religious fatalism na destiny, na fate, kapalaran, tapos parang okay na yan, basta yan ang winil ng kapalaran, destiny natin yan, no? So yung ganung sentiment, no, it actually again, babalikan mo na ang taas kasi ng religiosity ng mga Pilipino. 'Di ba? At kung sa kanila, ang pag-practice sila ng religiosity ay kung ano ang sa tingin nila, winil ni God or ng higher power, hayaan na natin, sundin na natin yan. Malakas ang malakas nga ang correlation nun against criticism or pag-submit sa authority. No?
But I'm looking at the data, and this is what stands out to me, no? Kunyari, in this table, na the president was elected because it is the will of God, 47% strongly agree. But criticizing the president is dishonoring the will of God.
Yes.
48% strongly disagree.
Oo.
So it doesn't follow that the acceptance of the will of God means I do not like criticizing the president. It doesn't follow it. Diba? So how do you explain that? In
Kasi-
other words, that support does not necessarily mean no criticism. Hindi. Kasi ito,
Kasi
magka-cause eh.
actually yung pag mineasure mo naman talaga criticism by itself, wala naman siya sa high end. Kumbaga hindi siya doon sa kung on a scale of 1 to 5, wala siya doon sa near 5, no. Medyo nasa gitna, which is good kasi at least kahit papaano, no, may openness pa rin, no. However, para doon sa mga nagki-criticize, no, or yung doon sa mga supporters niya, very strong kasi yung correlation, no. But for the others, for example, yung nasa low end, yun nga yung nagsasabi na they are open no, to criticizing him, no? So, meron pa rin namang segment ng ating lipunan saying na they're still open to criticizing
Actually,
him, no?
ibabangga ko dun sa first question din. I think what it shows is that they can make a distinction between
Support.
the duty to support government
Yes.
and my ability to criticize. They can make a distinction
Yes.
between
Ako rin.
supporting and criticizing.
Oo. Kasi parang lumalabas kasi no yung agency ng individual no to decide number one, ini-inform din ito ng kanyang faith. No? And number two, ini-inform dito socially what's happening around him. So kumbaga, kung ikaw ay nagde-decide, no, ano ba talaga kung ikaw ay individual, for example, na yung tinatawag natin mababa yung political efficacy, no, yung hindi ka masyadong involved in your own political work, yung civic duty mo, no, mas mabilis ngayon yung influence nitong religious, yung sa tingin mo na tinatawag ng Diyos, ng tadhana, tinatawag ng ibang tao. So mas may predisposition ka, no, na etong mga heuristics na to, sige, susunod na lang ako kung ano sinasabi ng Diyos. Okay na yan, divinely willed na yan. Okay na yan, yung sinasabi ng tao. Huwag na nating kontrahin yan. Okay na tayo. May mga ganun din kasi mga tao who are more predisposed, no, na hindi mas malalim yung kanilang political work or political involvement. But there are also segments, no, ng ating lipunan na hindi ganun yung dinidisplay, no, na mas active ang forms nila ng engagement. Na although they may be religious, no, members na very active members ng kung ano mang faith, organized faith nila, no, mas na-exercise nila yung kanilang agency to decide. So meron pa rin naman na nag-exist na ganong mga individuals.
Pero generally, kasi you're saying, hindi naman siya specific actually to Duterte, pero it plays a big role na siya nga yung presidente. Pero culturally talaga bang, kasi sinasabi yan, I'm sure, yung mga politician yan ang gustong malaman ngayon eh. Gusto ba ng Pilipino ng negative campaigning? Because they keep saying, it doesn't work eh. Kapag yung negative campaign, kaya daw natalo yung, well, hindi na ako babanggit ng mga yung previous kasi they went negative, heavily negative. In fact, they're saying, kaya nag-landslide si Duterte, ni-negative siya ng gusto. Is there a basis for that?
I think yun yung explanation because we've become highly polarized.
Yes.
Na parang you tend to align with people who share the same sentiments.
In fact, they were saying that even in the campaign last year. Kasi sobrang negative daw. And it contributed, although this guy is really popular, no? Pero it contributed daw dahil they went positive, yung kabila daw nag-negative ng gusto. Did that play a role?
I think yun yung confirmation bias nga, no? Na kapag kasi there's this sense of discomfort na kapag hindi mo ka-align yung political views ng iba, medyo umaalis ka doon at you tend to gravitate towards others who share the same point of view. Kasi naturally, may discomfort doon, no? Kaya din nagkakaroon tayo ng sinatawag ng echo chambers, kasi mas komportable ka doon, no? So you now become highly polarized and you become protective of your own views, of your own opinions, at kung sino man yung kandidato nyo. And ganoon din naman yung kabilang kampo, no? So doon nagkakaroon ng hindi pagko-connect, no? Kasi nagkakaroon ng ito yung kami, no? Ito kayo. in-group thinking na we're safe here, pwede natin ilambas yung kabilang grupo, pero tayo, happy tayo na sinusuportahan natin yung kandidato natin. No? Pero pagdating sa kabila, we're also happy lambasting the other camp. So may mga ganong
Pero dun sa mga, kunyari, tawagin nila nating swing voters pa, no? Yung mga hindi pa sila, fixed on either candidate. Parang yung negative campaigning ba, nakaka-turn off yun? Does it urge them to vote against the person that they perceive to be the ones doing the negative campaigning? I guess yun yung tanong niya.
Actually, ang ganda nung mga nasa neutral, no? Na pwedeng kahit saan, di ba? Ito yung kailangan kasi natin tutukan. Kasi for example, kung ang nakakarating sa kanila ay mga disinformation or misinformation, delikado yun. Kasi kung halimbawang sila man ay kunyari gusto nila maging informed decision maker sila, pero information naman na na-encounter nila ay may bahid nga ng disinformation, delikado, no? Pero kung may mga iba naman na again not doing enough political work, no, na bahala na basta ito yung nagtitrend ito yung nagtitrend, so ito na yun, no. So yung negative campaigning, again, it depends din kasi kung maaari kasing neutral sila, pero meron silang potential to swing in one direction, no. Kung mas nag-reinforce nung swing na yon ay yung boses ng isang kampo, then mas mataas yung tendency to side with that camp. Kaya nga importante, again, during election campaign period, na ang daming information na nakalatag dyan, no? At credible sana yung information na yun.
I'm curious about how that particular moment and that particular context of the Duterte administration and its behavior influenced how people would take. Because si Duterte, to my mind, and his handlers would actively push that, di ba? Na parang Tatay Digong yun eh.
Yes.
Na parang hinalal yan eh. Parang tapos, ba't kayo kontra sa gobyerno?
Yes.
Di ba? Wag naman kayo ganyan. Di ba? Parang ganyan. But, as opposed to, for example, the Noynoy Aquino said, kayo ang boss ko. Di ba? And basically saying, I welcome criticism. And so I'm wondering how much of this is just people responding to what government is actively also framing for them.
Yes.
So let me add to that kasi I think markado rin na in the last 6 years yung narrative na sumunod na lang kasi kayo. Huwag na kayo kumangal. Just follow the government. That was much more marked in the last 6 years than the previous ones.
Oo. Parang yun yung reductionist rhetoric no, na you're either with the government or against the government, di ba? At parang ito yung naging measure ng allegiance to country, na kapag allegiant ka sa authority, aka former President Duterte, mahal mo ang bansa. 'Di ba? So parang doon nakadangle na nakalimutan natin ang allegiance to country ay iba 'yon sa pagsunod, no? Sa alituntunin, no? Maaaring alituntunin na 'yon ay again prescribed ng pangulo or talagang prescribed ng batas, 'di ba? So magkaiba 'yon eh. So parang because of the rhetoric, no? Na you're either with me or against me, at pag against ka sa akin, against ka sa Pilipinas, ay maumadlad ng Pilipinas. Syempre na nagkakaroon ng pagtatanong yung mga Pilipino, naku, ayoko na yata mag-critique kasi mahal ko naman ang Pilipinas, susunod na lang. So meron din ganong klase ng information.
Able to make that distinction between officials in government and the country?
Exactly. Yun nga yung I think yun yung kailangan tutukan ng civic education na iba yung pagmamahal sa bansa. At iba din yung pagiging critical or pagiging assertive, no? Paano nga ba kasi
that's a message to citizens. I asked that in very practical terms for politicians. Di ba? In other words, meron di ba ditong, incumbent officials, incumbent presidents, let's say Bongbong Marcos, di ba? President, kuidaw ka rin. Parang you don't look at this survey and say na, wala palang babati ko sa akin, di ba? Parang that's how people feel. But then you take it also in the context of, no, how do you craft it? Do you inherit that? Is that a given in our culture, or is that also a trap if you fall into that and not realize na in the chicken and egg yan? It has to be, it actually cuts both ways, and you can actually walk into a trap if you think this way.
When I was reading literature, nabasa ko kasi na kapag people feel na there's some sort of chaos or disorder, no, or magulo, mabigat ang paligid, ganyan, doon sila mas nagkikling to authority for direction. Parang ito yung again yung dialectic ng autonomy versus social control or order.
Tatanong
no?
ko yun what was the role played by the pandemic
Oo.
dito sa ganitong thinking? Kasi, everyone most people were dependent on the government for ayuda, di ba?
Oo.
And every night, lahat tayo nag-aabang, ano na bang ating, ano na bang alert
Nag-aabang na
level
tayo sa
natin
TV.
ngayon? Kahit alas 12 ng gabi, lahat tayo gising na,
Naalala ko.
di ba? Hindi natin malaman what will be the
Laging
restriction
handa.
tomorrow. So we had to listen to him, even if kahit na sinong awayin niya, we had to listen to him. Lahat ng tao. Gusto nating malaman, makakalabas ba ako bukas o hindi. How much did that play in this attitude?
Kasi ang taas ng confidence ng public din na kayang isolve ni Duterte yung COVID problems
Dahil
along
nasa
with
ayuda.
terrorist threat and all the other issues na hinain namin doon sa survey, no. So yun nga, no, parang ang mga tao they tend to cling to authority kapag sa tingin nila magulo, mabigat ang paligid, no. So and I think no, yun din na kaya naging battle cry din nung for example nung campaign ni President Bongbong Marcos and the Vice President Sara Duterte, yung unity. Diba kasi order
I
and
was gonna
cohesion.
ask you
no?
oo.
So ang ganda nung pagkaka-anchor nila doon kasi
Actually,
napulsahan nila na may
yes.
ganitong nabibigatan ng mga
No,
tao
but really, isn't that also an indication of unity? I mean, the fact that, anong tawag dyan, a critical number of people actually believe in this president, that he should be supported, that there should be as less criticism against him as possible because it's divisive. Isn't that a good thing? It's an indication nga of a unified public, whatever.
Okay lang naman na united tayo, walang problema doon eh. Pero kung tatanungin natin ang operationalization ba noon tatahimik na lang tayo, magbubulag-bulagan na lang tayo. I think doon natin kailangang i-address kung ano nga bang ibig sabihin ng unity, 'di ba? Ano nga bang expense ng desire natin for order? Napapayagan na lang natin na kung ano lang yung gawin ng mga nakaupo diyan, hayaan na natin mas may alam naman sila. Hayaan na natin divinely willed. Hayaan na natin majority naman inelect sila. Parang doon nagkakaroon ng gap na paano nga ba natin i-hold itong mga elected officials accountable? No, even if we desire unity, parang ano ba yung greatest common denominator natin na pwede nating putungtungan, no? If we want unity, if we want yung progress, no? If we want na maramdaman natin ito, pero paano nga ba siya tatahi sa ating role as citizens or as individuals?
Let me push forward with that. With your findings, so how can Filipinos hold anybody accountable? With these kinds of numbers, yun naman pala.
Hindi, pero I was gonna say, I mean, it's not a question, but if I summarize down the line, diba, they're saying, suportahan natin, 40%, suportahan natin ang administration at all times. Diba? Pero hindi naman ako sang-ayon na hindi ko responsibilidad ko sumunod na lang. Diba? Yun din sinabi. Diba? Hindi rin ako sang-ayon na obligasyon kung hindi i-critique, di ba? So parang okay naman, may balance
so,
naman doon,
di ba? May puwang.
May distinction naman, di ba?
So yun yung level of optimism din namin doon sa study na yan, na may puwang again for civic education, even the religious. May puwang sila, no? Para for education, may panahon pa, no? Before the midterm elections, before the national elections again. So may space pa para again i-reinforce ito nga yung mga factors na pwede pa natin tutukan, no? If we want again na yung susunod na halalan mas maging prepared ang members ng public, no? Maaring yung preparation na yon ay sa simpleng pagdi-discourse with family and friends na influential din sa kanilang decision making. Kasi baka mamaya sa mismong parang safe space nila. Huwag na natin sabihin yung social media kasi medyo may bardagulan doon, di ba? Pero sa family and friends nila.
Hindi na rin safe space yung ibang pamilya.
Yun na nga, di ba? So I think kailangan i-open yung safe space na yon among family members and yung role nila sa socialization, even ng mga bata, no? I saw nung last campaign, no? Yung political campaign, sa may mga kabataan at may mga parents na nagdadala ng mga bata, no? Doon sa political rallies. So may mga parents talaga na open sila na i-educate yung mga anak nila very early on. So yung mga ganito sanang unti-unti, no? Sa maliit na levels na, no? Sa community level, sa family level, kung may exposure na, no? Na pwedeng pag-usapan ito, no? Kahit na hindi sa social media, pero pag-usapan lang kahit sa pamilya, no? So nagkakaroon ngayon ng panahon para pag-usapan, i-diskurso, magtalo-talo. Anyway, may unconditional love naman sa pamilya, yung mga ganun ba? Or kung hindi minsan wala, I know. Pero kung wala naman, 'Diba? At least, no, na alam nila na pwede nilang erase yung punto na yon. But I also know na may mga pamilya din nag-away-away
Talaga?
because of, yun nga, polarization. No?
Tita left
Saka
the
mga
group.
bata,
Oo.
ang problema dyan, sabihin napaka-boring naman ng topic na to, magti-TikTok na lang ako.
Or may mga bata na sila yung mas vocal.
Actually, sasabihin ko nga, yung mga neutral ang nakakatakot kasi wala.
Gaganon na lang ako.
Either here nor there, no? I really don't care.
Dito na lang ako sa cellphone ko, dyan na ako, bahala ka sa buhay.
Gagawa na lang ng subgroup sa Viber yon.
Yan ang problema. Your next study.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. This is Professor Rosel San Pascual of UPCMC. Thank you. And we will start up another conversation right after this breather. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We now have Pulse Asia President Ronald Holmes. Good evening and welcome back to the program, Professor.
Good
Good evening, Ami.
Magandang
Good
gabi po.
evening.
Hi, sir.
Good evening to you all.
Professor, before we go to this main topic, no, tatanungin ko lang kaya, it's been a year since Election Day. At kukumustahin ko lang, based on your surveys, how is the new administration doing?
Well, essentially the same as previous administrations. When I refer to previous administrations, that's the administration of the late Noynoy Aquino and Rodrigo Duterte. No? They're essentially, the president is getting the same approval and trust ratings in the surveys that we conducted from September, November, and this March.
May room pa ba dyan for the opposition or for constructive criticism? Kasi yun ang sinasabi nila na hindi daw talaga makapasok dito, talagang Teflon tong administration na to.
I think dapat isipin ng opposition yung mga strategiya para sila makapag-connect sa publiko. Yung criticism can be done in so many ways, no? And I think the opposition, as small as it is right now, if you talk about the mainstream opposition, it has to start communicating better. And the other thing that it has to do is really organize, increase the mass base, because this is something that many political parties have actually failed to do. And this is something that the opposition should be able to do in the future.
Pero sir, the opposition has been saying that since the last debacle, the previous debacle in 2019. So
Yes.
I suppose
Yep.
at this point they're looking at their surveys and trying to figure out what else have we not been doing?
Yes.
Kasi it's the same thing over again.
Medyo nakaligtaan kasi nila, Ed, na meron mga binabato sa kanila. Kunyari, na panahon na nung nakaraang administrasyon, parating sinasabi ng mga kasapi ng administrasyon, ng Duterte administration, na wala naman nangyari ng panahon ni Pinoy. Pero hindi ito totoo, no? Dapat ay sinasagot yan. Yung credit claiming na naganap na itong nakaraang administrasyon, dapat binubunyag yan na a number of the projects actually started during the prior administration. So there's some sort of timidity on the part of the opposition to claim credit for things that it did in the past and to answer the malinformation coming from supporters of the prior administration.
Professor, atras lang ako ng konti. Just a basic question. When we say opposition, whether it's in your surveys or how people actually perceive it, malino ba kung ano yung framing nun? Do you frame that for them kung sino ang opposition or malinaw ba sa atin who the public is talking about when we say opposition?
Well, I'm talking of the opposition as a political scientist, so that makes it clear to me. With regard to the public, it may not be the same understanding as we have with regard to who the opposing group would be. The opposing group might be of a different political color on the part of the public because the opposition in the last administration was always jaded. No? Parang kinulayan sila, dilawan, and then at the latter part, tinklawan na. But that's not the only opposition that we're referring to. We're referring to many other groups that could have pushed back against illiberalist policies, liberal policies for that matter. You've got labor unions, you've got people in civil society organizations that have effectively weakened themselves by the fact that they failed to organize after the political transition or continue organizing after the political transition in 1986.
Well, that's the problem. No, I think that it's not really very clear right now who exactly would be the opposition. Do you think that the main problem is really a lack of a deep bench? In other words, there's nobody now, there's no face to the opposition. Siguro ang pinaka-familiar na face would be the left, no? And the left-leaning groups. Kasi they're the ones still in Congress, yung mga party list. But other than that, who are the personalities that would comprise that quote-unquote opposition?
Siguro, Lucy, the problem really is that the game that operates, actually the only game in town are elections. And elections will be the measure of whether one is in power or out of power. And the problem with that is that, in our elections, it's very personality-oriented. Our political parties are not genuine political parties.
Right.
A lot of resources get into the elections. And, since 2013, if you just remember, from 2013 onwards, you've got a number of guest candidates. In 2013, who would ever imagine that, the Nationalist Party and the Liberal Party, who were at odds in 2010, will come together?
Yes.
So the Nationalist Party, on the other hand, would have, in 2016, go with the left. So, in a sense, those loose alliances dissipate or dissolve what could have been a more policy-oriented, programmatic relationship between citizens and political parties. Wala tayong partido political sa katotohanan. At yung electoral system natin, masyado naman nakafocus sa pag-elect ng ilang individual, yung first past the post.
Professor, syempre ang tanong ngayon can this popularity of the president be sustained? Kasi in the last survey, there was a dip already in his performance rating, and pare-pareho yung sinasabi ng mga survey, mga pollsters, no? The biggest concern of people is inflation, and he gets the lowest marks in taming inflation. So, anong nakikita niyong trend? Maybe within the year lang siguro.
Oo, maaari. Na bumaba, no? Kasi hindi pa siya pinapanagot ngayon. Pero pag nagpatuloy itong mataas na presyo ng mga bilihin, kasi nakikita na yan na hindi mayorya ang hindi nag-a-approve sa pagganap ng administrasyon sa pagtugon doon sa pagtaas ng presyo ng mga bilihin. Eventually, it can be held accountable. We know that in the prior administration, President Duterte's approval rating also dipped in September 2018, if I'm not mistaken, largely because of the high prices of life. So, pag tinamaan na yung sikmura, maaaring panagutin. Maging isang pangulo na maaaring sabihin natin popular.
What about the latest? Kasi, well, it's very new, this latest political turbulence, no? And it's within his coalition, yan ang problema. You think it will have some impact on the performance ratings of both the president and his equally popular vice president?
Palagay ko, ang maaaring maapektuhan yan ay yung mga nag-aaway, yung mga nag-aaway sa mababang kapulungan. Kumbaga, nahihiwalay ng publiko yung kanilang pagtingin sa Pangulo, sa pangalawang Pangulo at sa mga nanunungkulan sa Kongreso. So, maaaring maapektuhan ang performance rating ng Speaker of the House. Maaaring maapektuhan kung ipa-translate natin si dating Pangulong Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, maaaring maapektuhan rin yung kanyang class rating.
Is it far-fetched to say that the opposition will probably come from those ranks in the House now, no? And even now we're seeing what people suspect to be a growing split, although that's at the moment unverified, no? But do you think that it's possible that the opposition will come from the same ranks?
It's possible, but I would say that more importantly, these are contending factions, no? Or contesting factions of the same incumbent controlling elite that we have. So maaaring mag-away sila, maaaring nila sumali sa oposisyon, pero alam din nila, pag nasa oposisyon ka, wala kang support. So you need to have access to resources that are quite important for you to survive politically. And being outside of administration definitely takes out that access to valuable resources.
Prof, every time we talk about high approval ratings, especially in the first year, analysts always tell us, par for the course naman yan, parating may honeymoon period. You look historically, lahat naman ng Pangulo in the first year mataas and so on. That said, itong current administration really went through a lot of di ba, sinasabi nga natin, malapit sa bituka lahat ng naging problema nitong first year, di ba? Yung hindi bumaba ang presyo, hitok on agriculture, ang daming gulo sa agriculture, you name the commodity, mataas ang presyo at mukhang...
Hanggang ngayon.
How do you reconcile that? And were you surprised that notwithstanding the conventional thinking na ano naman yan, may honeymoon period pa tayo, notwithstanding that, kung ibabangga mo doon sa other conventional thinking na pagka malapit sa bituka, iba yan, hindi mo may iwasan yan. Were you surprised by that or are you also seeing indicators na hindi, kakagat pa rin yung issue na yan? At
Maaring pinagbibigyan pa rin, no, Lobby, yung Pangulo. Maaring ring naniniwala sila doon sa naratibo na ang mataas na presyo ay hindi lamang dulot ng kakulangan ng paggawa ng pamahalaan. No? This is something that's externally induced also. But whether people would tolerate the high prices of commodities, no? You see a slight fluctuation, a sudden increase in terms of pump oil prices. We will see in the coming months, no? Because this is not something that can be retained, especially if people's disposable income are getting depleted just to satisfy basic needs.
Okay. Sir, well, let me back up a bit. In I think October, November, September 2022, Pulse Asia had a survey asking about the economy of the former president, the late President Ferdinand Marcos, and it turns out that 8 out of 10 respondents say that the economy then was actually okay. Let me start off with this. Why did you ask that question in particular in 2022, and what does that tell you?
We have an academic research right now. We're trying to find out essentially what people's perspective of the economy was during martial law. And in that survey, we found out that 4 out of 10 Filipinos think that the Philippine economy was at a golden age during martial law. 5 out of 10, if I can recall, Ed, were saying that the economy was not doing that badly. And then we conducted an experiment within the survey. In that experiment, what we did was that we divided the respondents into 3 groups. We provided 2 groups some information, which is factual. One group was given information that the Philippine economy did not fare comparably with the economy of other countries within that period, from 1965 to 1986. Our growth rate was the lowest at 3.9%. Another group was given a statement coming from a reputable economist from the University of the Philippines School of Economics that basically characterized the economy as something that was really heavily indebted and had the lowest growth rate in the post-war period. Despite that information provided to the respondents, they did not change their mind with regard to their opinion about the economy during the presidency of Ferdinand and Dalin Marcos from 1965 to 1986.
Yes, sir.
So what does that suggest of, kanina lang we were talking about disinformation, di ba? What does that suggest about all these efforts for fact-checking, for trying to correct historical revisionism,
for even doing studies.
All the efforts and investments on fact-checking and so on. What does that say about the effort and how we're doing it?
There is another study coming from 2 colleagues in the discipline. They basically suggest that, when you provide information, it should be information that is found to be relevant to the lives of the ordinary citizens. So providing information alone or checking information doesn't change the perspective of people. It should be something that they can relate with.
So in that particular example, what was wrong with the information you provided? Are you saying that information, na ang laki ng national debt, etc., hindi yun
medyo
nakarelate?
Nasa cognitive level siya. Nasa cerebral level
Ako, nasa kabaliktaran yung tanong ko, Prof. Yung opinion nila na golden age must have been shaped by information that also got to them. Diba? So what was right, not about the information, but by the way that information was conveyed to them and they accepted it?
And you find this even in our textbooks, Robbie. About a week ago, I was in a forum where historians pointed out that Philippine textbooks actually provide so much flexibility for students to actually get something to get. The students will believe that martial law was actually benign, that the economy was essentially not necessarily that bad. It did not, even the textbook do not provide that information. So in a sense, what happens is that people eventually believe that it was a golden age. And one of the things that I think is quite important here is that belief is very difficult to change. It cannot in any way be changed immediately by just providing one set of information. Ang sasabihin niyo sa'yo, hindi kami maniniwala dyan. Itong aming paniniwala.
But Prof, to that point, how long before that belief was shaped?
Indoctrination.
Di ba? Parang it doesn't it takes a long time. I think we all agree to change somebody's mind. But for that mind to have firmed up and to have really embraced this particular theory and thinking that golden age ang martial law years, how long did that
it
take?
actually started from 1992. Robbie.
Okay.
I'm working with social weather stations data here. No? In 1986, majority of Filipinos believed that Marcos was oppressive or was a thief. In 1998, reversal na. Imagine, 1986, 1998. Karamihan ng Pilipino hindi na naniniwala na oppressive si Marcos at marami siyang nanakaw in 1998. The turning point was actually also in 1992 when the Marcoses came back to electoral politics, you know. If you remember, Imelda Marcos landed fifth, ahead of some of the key oppositionists. So in a sense, it started from the political transition, our failure to secure transitional justice to get to the truth. If there was a truth commission in 1986, that would have settled all of these issues. But we did not get into that. Instead, we reconciled without really going into determining what actually happened during martial law.
Pero sir, what happened between...
Was that a failure of the Cory administration then? Because if we're talking about that period from 1992 all the way to 1998, and FBR, essentially the opposition to the Marcoses. You mean to say there was a failure there somehow to reverse what may have been an indoctrinating...
In many countries that underwent authoritarian rule, there was a period of transitional justice. South Africa, you had the Truth Commission. The Truth Commission was multi-sectoral. It tried to establish essentially what happened during the period of autocracy. In the Philippines, you know, if you look at it, when was it that the Human Rights Violations Act was passed? When did we start paying, remunerating, redressing the grievances of those whose rights were violated during martial law? It took a long time. So that's one thing that we lacked really. And one of our colleagues in the discipline said that it's not so much nostalgia. Nostalgia is for functional disinformation. The other thing I should say is that it's also what he refers to as authoritarian amnesia. Nakalimutan na. Kung ano nangyari.
Pero sir, going back to yung period between 1992 to 1998, kung saan mukhang nagbago yung ihip ng hangin, that was a time wala pang, number one, wala pang social media. Number two, the mainstream media was not exactly sympathetic to the Marcos family. So what accounts for that shift? I understand what you're saying na baka hindi na-implant yung lessons from the previous administrations, pero this seems to be an active shift, not a passive shift. Nagbago talaga ang ihip ng hangin.
Oh, but reconciliation was a term that...
Mahirap kasi balikan We have not done a longitudinal study, but I would think that people forgot what happened during martial law. And then the active campaign in terms of revising history may have contributed to the emergence of the belief that the martial law economy, or the economy under Ferdinand and Lenin Marcos, was the golden age of the Philippine economy.
Pero would you say na meron ding genuine disappointment dun sa the EDSA forces? Kasi yan ang sinasabi ng mga tao Kapag sinabi mo, eto si ganito corrupt, pare-pareho lang naman kayo Yun ang sinasabi nila actually.
Well,
you think meron ding yan? That also played a part. Meron ding failure, meron ding failure yan. Yes.
Yeah. Ang daming factors, Amy eh.
Yes.
And I would
Oo
say
nga.
that's one of them. Na nakadagdag yung kawalan ng, yung hindi sila naniniwala na totoo yung reformang pinatupad. Marami tayong skandalo na inarap
Yes.
na itong nakaraang 37 taon. At yung mga scandals na yun, essentially, those scandals question the commitment on the part of administrations to actually weed out, for example, corruption. I remember during the administration of President Aquino, the late Noynoy Aquino, scandals such as yung Laglag Bala question his commitment in terms of weeding corruption. Well, Laglag Bala lang yun. So, of course, during the last administration, it seems that those scandals did not erupt as much as it did in the past. Maybe because I don't know, whether it's self-censorship or the selective reporting of anomalies on the part of the
Kahit yung
administration.
people power, di ba? We had a second people power that I think people would rather forget now eh. So, nakadagdag din
Yeah.
yan, di ba? Nakasira siya eh. Would
And,
you say,
and even the ones who
kasi yun ang
led that
sinasabi
people power too.
Yes.
Maybe the ones who led the people power to apologize for their role, right? Remember the late President Cory saying
Cory.
that
Yes.
Cory said sorry.
he actually lamented that. So it's a number of factors. It's hard to pin it down, but essentially there's both active and there's also omission on the part of players who wish to actually promote the truth. Because the truth is something that's very important for us to regain or sustain our freedom.
Pero balikan ko lang yung sinabi niyo, you mentioned something about messaging, no? Na medyo cerebral yung takbo ng mga criticism. Because this is a very dangerous if people think, huwag na tayo mag-criticize eh, hindi ba? Mawawala yung accountability. You're saying kailangan makarelate yung mga tao kapag you criticize something, kailangan maintindihan ng mga tao, bakit masama to, anong magiging impact nun sa inyo? Halimbawa sinabi, etong si ganitong opisyal nagnakaw, anong impact niyan sa tao? Are you saying, yon, it might work, yung ganong classic messaging? Because politicians are trying to find out, people are preparing now, even this early, no, for the next campaign. At saka, syempre, magtatanong yan, anong messaging namin?
Yeah, eventually, people who are opposed to what is happening right now, or people who want the country to progress in a more genuine mode, will have to think of creative ways in terms of connecting to the public. Of course, there might come a time where the conditions would actually make the public more receptive to what the opposition or those opposed to the current dispensation would say. We've seen this in other countries. So, for example, we see this in Thailand. After several years of, yellow versus red and military rule, suddenly you have a new party gaining ground. It's not because of what the new party did, but it's because of the conditions that allowed basically the new party to connect to the public, the realities that they confronted and how that particular party committed themselves to address those problems or concerns that the public was confronting or is confronting.
But also, I mean, speaking of Thailand, something very pragmatic there. That actually, when you talk about the citizens' parties, it's actually an alliance of the Democrats and the child of Thaksin Shinawatra, whom they were fighting before. But anyway, Prof, one last question. We're almost out of time. Gusto ko lang ibalik dun sa focus group nyo na yung kinausap nyo. I'm really very intrigued by that na hinarapan nyo ng economic data, factual, hinarapan nyo rin ng isang kilalang economist, pero pinanindigan nila that they didn't want to change their minds. Is it possible that they looked at these economists and for that matter, they looked at Pulse Asia and they thought, this is not necessarily a credible source of data to me when it comes to the economy, when it comes to history. And to that point, I guess the more important question is, who do they find credible? Beyond the length of time it takes, but are there sources of information that people do find credible?
That's a very difficult question to answer, Robbie. No? Even the people that I find credible with regard to fighting frauds are being questioned right now as incredible. So it's a matter of perspective. And you cannot rule that out, no? That people's expression of opinion may be influenced by the fact by the people who are asking them, or the group that would be asking them, and their perception of the credibility or trustworthiness of that group. And that's one thing that's really, I think, is most lamentable in our society, that truth is not anymore sought out, and the people who actually speak truth to power are the ones who are found to be not credible.
Sir, pahabol lang, sir. Zoom into us. What does this tell us in the media about how we should be treating data and information?
Or we're not credible.
Hindi rin tayo credible.
What do we get from your numbers?
I'd rather not make a prescription to media because I'm not from media. But I think the media, journalists, are faced with a big challenge really right now. And it's really, many people usually read newspapers. I think the readership of newspapers is down to 1.5%. Our surveys tell us that about 7 out of 10 Filipinos access the internet, and almost all of them access the news about government and politics on Facebook. And you have a plethora of news sources on Facebook. It's not just one news that's on Facebook. There are many other pretentious news sources on Facebook. So, and that's the biggest challenge. You're competing with several other sources of information, what people may perceive as news. Would they believe you versus the other sources? I think that's the hurdle that journalists and legitimate media organizations would have to hurdle.
Fair enough.
Professor Holmes, always a pleasure having you with us. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Professor.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Maraming salamat.
Pulse Asia President Ronald Holmes. And that is all we have for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.